Welcome everyone to another episode of Whiskey Wednesday Live with the Uncle Nearest team. I'm Chastity from Chicago, and we're here every Wednesday to talk all things whiskey with our distillery friends. So I'm Chastity from Chicago again, and my team is here. Team, say hi.
Hi, team.
Hey, y'all.
We got Ian over there in Chicago too.
Hi. Nice to meet you, Tracie.
You as well.
Hey, Tracie. I'm Matt Carlson in Los Angeles.
Hey, Matt.
Got a little bit of fire and cane here.
Nice.
To drink tonight.
Experimental.
Yeah, I'm a little
nice, Matt.
No. I try to, switch it up every now and then.
Yeah.
Yeah. And hey, team. Good to see y'all on Whiskey Wednesday. You're looking good, by the way.
You too.
Everyone's looking good. I love it.
I'm feeling quarantine fat. I'll be honest. That's why I got the sweatshirt out.
Ian, you look quarantine FA-abulous.
Thank
That's
you.
what you. Yes.
Yeah, I do feel quarantine large, but I also made pasta carbonara tonight, so that's my own fault. Yeah, I've done this to myself.
Back to the whiskey.
Sorry. Hey, viewers. I'm Richie. I'm the U.S. Brand Ambassador for Uncle Nearest. I'm based here in Louisville, Kentucky. It's good to see you, Tracie.
You as well.
And I'm Sailor, and I'm in the Pacific Northwest, Brand Ambassador for Uncle Nearest. And Tracie, I made sure to scream for you at the Icons Awards this year. When they said your name, I'm pretty sure that's when I blew out my voice. I knew you weren't there, and I was hoping to meet you in person, and we didn't get a chance to, but I made sure I was screaming, and everybody was looking at me.
Who was that big?
There was a lot of screaming that night.
There was. Our group was very loud.
What's unfortunate is that was the week of our national company meeting.
Oh,
so
okay.
we had every distributor, had every retailer was there, and we were basically presenting our brand and our brand plans for the year to them, and had to be there. So I couldn't make it out to New York, and I'm very, very sad. And I really want to get my certificate, though.
They didn't give it to you? What the heck?
No, I don't have it yet. I sent my address. I didn't give it. So otherwise, I was like, I want that on my wall.
I know. You should have it on your wall.
I'm going to reach out again.
Yes, do that. Make sure.
Let's just jump right in since we're already talking about who Tracie is, right? Because yeah. For those of us watching, who don't know who Tracie is, she is the National Brand Ambassador for Glenfiddich Scotch Whiskey. And Tracie, if you wouldn't mind just sharing with us a little bit about yourself and your career prior to whiskey, which I find so fascinating, and also your current role.
Thank you. I am Tracie Franklin. I am in Washington, D.C. I have had a recent promotion to become the National Ambassador. Previously, I was the Southeast and then East, and then then I got the promotion to take over National, which is really exciting.
Yay!
Unfortunately, it was during this whole COVID-19 nonsense, so I didn't do a huge, release. I didn't necessarily proclaim it from the rooftops, but I'm still incredibly proud, and when it's all over, I want to throw a big party.
Yeah.
I want to go to that.
I want to come.
Me too.
I don't know when it is, but I will be in DC that day.
You are all invited.
Please let us know. I'll be there.
My career has been interesting, multifaceted in different ways. I actually started in hospitality, actually. So I worked as a server and bartender when I was in high school, and then when I was in college. But while I was actually in college, I was studying to be a performer. So I majored in musical theater at Cal State Fullerton, which is in Southern California. I immediately went on tour. They really prepared me for work, and I was immediately working. So I'm really, really lucky. I went on a cruise ship toward the Mediterranean and the Caribbean and the Baltic. Then I booked a tour with Disney, and I saw the world. So I've been to over 50 countries, and I actually sang in 9 languages. Yeah. Which I didn't know was a skill until they were like, hey, we're going to teach you Thai. And I was like, let's see if I can do that. So I could, and actually did. It was one of the things that I didn't realize. I was actually really good at imitating. I was good at mimicking sound. So I was able to say these things. I had no idea what was coming out of my mouth, but it sounded like I did. So I was speaking Mandarin Chinese and speaking Thai and Japanese, even though I have no idea what these words really were. And so I really just got to a point where I wanted to perform for adults. So I moved to New York and I did Broadway tours, Hairspray, Color Purple, Ragtime. I did some Broadway charity events on Broadway, so it was kind of cool. And while I was doing that, you're in New York, you need money, and I was bartending. So I joined the USBG New York, and really that just showed me where that path could take me. I was off Broadway when my husband booked he wasn't my husband then, but he booked a job with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I was thinking, big deal. I'll move down to Florida. They have theater there, and I'll just come back to New York if I need. Didn't work that way. I ended up getting a job at a place called Sideburns or Haven, and it was one of the biggest whiskey collections. We built it to one of the biggest whiskey collections in Florida. And because I had already loved whiskey, I had already created a company called Whiskey, which was about whiskey marketing. So that was to increase diversity in the world of whiskey. My partner, Jennifer Wren, and I would basically work with brands to create events. And this was almost 10 years ago. Whew. So we were making events that just didn't exist at that time. At that time, people weren't doing really cool things like cupcake tastings and roller skating. And, we were kind of at the forefront of creating an opportunity for different people to learn about whiskey in a way that was very approachable.
Okay.
So took that down to Florida. I mean, whiskey brands just started saying, hey, we want to hire you. And it was nice to have money. So it just really increased from there. I worked for Angel's Envy. I worked for a rum brand. I worked my way up until single malt came back around, because that's been my passion since I was performing, actually, when I discovered Ardbeg, which is a peated whiskey. That was my gateway.
Okay.
I'm a weirdo. And
quite a gateway.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's an intense one. Yeah.
Your gateway is at the back door.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody else is like, oh no. And I was like, oh my gosh, my life has changed. I don't know what to do. I think part of it is because I am a military brat. So my father traveled the world and he would bring back his cuisines and stories. So as I traveled, I also tried to take he always taught us to try everything. Like, if the locals eat it, you eat it. Like, don't judge anybody's culture. Don't judge just try it. Mm-hmm. And so I've been able to experience some of the most amazing things around the world. I've eaten some of the strangest things, some good, some bad, but I was going to do it. I don't care. And I think the reason that...
No bat heads. Stay away from
no
bat.
Bat. There was never bat available. That wasn't it. But actually, never mind. Let's not go down that path.
We'll come back to it. We'll just put a pin in it.
But I was just going to talk about the wet markets and how they're actually really cool to walk through. Anyways, but what peated whiskey did for me was it was a visceral reaction. It was something that you smell, you taste, and you feel it throughout your entire body. So that was what was really exciting to me, was that I had this whiskey, this one thing that, and I had to be very careful when I was touring because I was singing. And whiskey does affect my voice. I mean, alcohol just does. It drives my chords. So I, especially for a lot of the things I was doing then, had a soprano range and was singing a lot of high notes. So no alcohol for me. But one glass of whiskey was fine. So Ardbeg or Lafroig or Lagavulin at that time, it was one glass. It was soup. I would last all night long.
That's really all you need, right?
Smoking and drinking at the same time.
Yeah.
It was perfect.
Yeah.
Making much more sense now. You wanted 6 glasses, but you had to pack all 6 glasses into one
glass.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
Okay. I get it now.
So now, but I also realized it was really hard to find nuance when you went to any other style. You just couldn't find those really beautiful, gentle flavors that were in some of these other balanced whiskeys. So I actually worked my way back through American whiskey.
Wow. Awesome. That's pretty amazing, Tracie. Well, our panel has some great questions for you tonight. And viewers, please feel free to type in your questions, and Sailor will make sure that we get those questions answered for you. So let's start with Ian.
Okay, so I actually did not know that you were a performer, and I hate to hit this nail on the head again for me, but my background, I started in classical music.
Oh, I love that. I really wanted to study more classically, but my look was just so perfect for musical theater. It just, it was so easily marketable.
I'm large and dull, so I'm a bass baritone.
Ooh.
I do really well being large and dull on stage, just park and bark it.
Yeah.
But anyways, my question for you was actually a cocktail question, because Scotch has so much history, and not only does there it is, and not only does it have history, but it has a lot of, I think, there's just a lot of structure around how certain Scotch drinkers think you should drink your whiskey. And we get the same thing in the American category, especially with more like with bourbon a lot. So for you, what is your favorite cocktail with Scotch cocktail, and how do you kind of combat that with a fan base that can be so stuck in their ways?
Absolutely. So one of the reasons that I was so adamant about I was so excited about becoming the Glenfiddich ambassadors, because this category needed representation that looked like me. It needed representation that spoke from my point of view, because for so long it just hasn't existed. And I wanted to be the person that stood there and said, I belong in this category, I belong here, and I love this whiskey, and so should you. No matter what you look like, what you do, who you are, where you're going, where you came from. This is actually a place where you belong, and these whiskeys are meant for you. So the first thing that I say at my tastings is that you should be drinking your whiskey any way you want, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the reason I say that, because I think you can say that, but if you don't explain to people why, then they're just feeling like, oh, well, I'm still breaking the rules, but she just gave me permission. But if you actually teach them that, I tell them that they need to drink their whiskey the way they're drinking currently. So if they're only wine drinkers, then they need to get that whiskey down to a proof that's closer to wine. If they drink cocktails, they need to get the whiskey into a cocktail. They need to find those through lines where their palate is able to accept that whiskey, and they're able to find the characters and the flavors that they enjoy. Then that will make them go pick up another glass. If they just come in and immediately are into straight neat whiskey, and their palate isn't used to having straight alcohol, it doesn't matter what you're having, you're not going to enjoy that. So I want to make sure that they're first getting that whiskey to a point where they can enjoy it, where they can find the aromas, they can find those flavors on their palate, and then they go, oh, okay, this is why people drink this.
Yeah, I like that.
So one of the easiest cocktails for sure, and also one of the most approachable, is a highball. So a highball I definitely prefer with soda water personally, because I like to taste what the whiskey is. So when you add soda water to your Glenfiddich Scotch, it really elevates the fruitiness of it. We're known for having that sort of green pear, green apple, that really fresh, bright fruit note, which comes from our 72-hour fermentation, which for you guys isn't really that long in the bourbon world, but in Scotland, where we're not allowed to use any additional enzymes, it's actually a fairly long fermentation. So that produces a lot of beautiful esters, which produces the fruit, and in a highball, that's immediately what you get on the nose as you add that soda water. So that way it's bringing the proof down, but it's also highlighting the sweetness of the whiskey. So I love to give people highballs. Also, even with ginger ale, sometimes just put a dash of ginger just to give that sweetness as well. I'm currently drinking a, well, I guess it's a dry Rob Roy.
Okay.
I'm a huge fan of making your own syrups. And I made a pear syrup. So basically made sort of a pear cordial, and then added a little bit of additional sugar to turn that into a syrup. And then I stirred some thyme in with some dry vermouth. It's my favorite.
Oh, that sounds delicious.
I love making cocktails, and this is one that you can drink. For me, it's 8 o'clock, but I'm also coming back from being ill. So I'm trying to, so it's still got the vermouth kind of cut it. I can sit upon this for quite a little while. It's not too heavy, not too rich. What else do I like to give people? Oh, old fashions.
Yeah.
Especially with that 14 that's sitting around that you guys all have.
Oh, yeah.
Because it has
That's what I'm sipping on right now.
Yes. So big new American oak finish. So it's 14 years in ex-bourbon barrels. That's not uncommon. 90% of the barrels in Scotland are actually going to be ex-bourbon barrels. We think America. We love Kentucky, because most of them also do come from Kentucky. But bourbon can be made anywhere. Anyways,
It's important.
Change it for another day.
right? Exactly. But we take it after those 14 years and actually finish it in new American oak casks that we have made at Kelvin Cooperage with a family-owned cooperage, and they toast it and heavily charged with 3.5. So that additional sweetness, that caramels, all of that oak influence that you're getting is from that additional 6 months in new American oak.
So we have a question from Fawn Weaver, who is our founder and CEO of Uncle Nearest.
Hi, Fawn.
And Fawn says, "Don't shoot me, Tracie, but I've never been a fan of any Scotch but Johnny Walker Blue. But I want to be. So what from the Glenfiddich line would she recommend, knowing that I've only found one other Scotch I enjoy, but would love to find another at my home bar that I can enjoy?
So how does she drink it? I'm sorry, Fawn. Neat. Okay,
Neat.
great. So Johnny Walker Blue is usually, I think, at 40. It's very mild. It's a beautiful blend using older Scotch whiskeys. It doesn't have a lot of influence from any of the Islay whiskeys. It is much more of a Highland Speyside forward. Even Lowlands are in there. So for me, for Glenfiddich, I would probably push you towards the 15, which is going to be a very quintessential Speyside, but it's going to have a little bit more of a sherry influence to it. If we wanted to go even beyond that, our Glenfiddich 19, the Age of Discovery, which is actually not really being made anymore. So it's kind of easily. I was like, why would I give her that one? It's like hard to get.
Be able to find it.
Really, really beautiful. 100% in ex-bourbon cask for 19 years, and it's just created this really beautiful, elegant flavor and a soft fruitiness that I think she would enjoy. That's also fairly mild and very approachable. With the 12, if you were going to go there, I think you're going to find that to be a little bit brighter than what the blue would normally be. So I'm going to go 15. If you want to go up, take a step up, I'd go 19. 15 is going to have a little bit of dryness, a little bit of spiciness from like cloves and allspice. And then also it's going to have a beautiful honey note to it. Now the 15 is our Solera Reserve. Let's see, what is that? It's back there somewhere. There
you go.
Yay! Yes. So it's our Solera Reserve. It's in my decanter right here, but you can't tell that obviously. So I actually love it. So it is actually built in an 11,000 gallon vat that we built in 1997. So 11,000 gallons of cask strength whiskey aged in ex-sherry, ex-bourbon, and new American oak. So we filled that up in 97, and it's never been less than half full since then. We constantly put 15-year-old whiskey into the vat, bring it down to half, add more whiskey, bring it down to half. So it's our most consistent, and it's really one of the most complex.
I think it's such a great transition for a bourbon drinker as well. I think Fawn will find a lot of stuff in there that's going to remind her a little bit of Uncle Nearest as well, that she'll identify with it. And so she says that, so we know that penicillin is her favorite cocktail. She swaps out the Scotch for the 1856. So which Glenfiddich expression would you recommend for that specific cocktail?
So what is she using for the smoke, though? Because you still have to have that smoky whiskey.
Well, we've had this debate in our internal.
Penicillin if you don't have that smoke on tap.
See, I think
don't be quiet, guys.
well, otherwise it's just like a ginger sour, right?
Right,
yeah. Pretty much, yeah.
It is, yeah.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
And if I'm making a ginger sour, I would use it to 12 or 14.
Okay, so let's pretend we do this. Let's say we use the 14 for the penicillin, and then we take the Balvenie peat week and float it on there, so that it's not an overwhelming peat, right? You want something soft,
or even that's absolutely the Fire and Cane as well. So that our Fire and Cane is peated whiskey, but it's blended with unpeated whiskey, then finished in rum casks. So it's that smoke and sweet. So a lot of people are using that for the penicillin.
Ooh, I want to try that as a float. Right? Yeah, totally. That's
good.
Okay, so we'll write this up for Fawn afterwards.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you so much, Fawn.
I love it.
And if you don't want just a ton of the smoke in there, and you just want maybe the just to smell it, you can just use an atomizer on the top. If you don't want the full.
Well, it's supposed to just be the atomizer. It should just be that bar spoon. It should not be
the atomizer. It's fine.
It's more about the aroma of it, but it does change the cocktail.
That's true.
And that's originally made with monkey shoulder, by the way.
Love some monkey shoulder.
As that base.
Oh yeah.
Who's next for our next question?
All right. What else? What am I? Did I answer all the questions? I'm like.
So that's more.
Do the right
thing. So I've got kind of a question, but it's kind of not a question at the same time. So we did our Whiskey Wednesday for our UK market earlier in the day because of the time difference.
That's why they had Mark. Love it.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. And we had our guest was Mark Thompson.
He and I are really good friends. I enjoy him very much.
Oh, he is so entertaining.
He's amazing.
Oh my goodness! Even after we were done with the Whiskey Wednesday, he stayed on the call and we chatted for like an hour.
And the amount of bleeps I'm gonna have to do for the
Oh,
F-bombs.
no.
Oh my
Oh, no.
goodness.
Yeah, I was like,
Well, don't worry. I try
dinner's
to
in the
mind my
oven.
language.
I know.
So he said, I told him, I said, we've got Tracie Franklin on our US version tonight. Is there anything that I should ask her that you would recommend would be a fun story? And he said, I'm not going to tell you any details. Hope she remembers this. But all he said to me was, ask her about the first ambassador training session we had when we were all smoking cigars.
It's going great.
Oh man!
Try to set you up, Richie.
First
Yeah,
ambassador.
This is Tracie's way of pretending she can't remember.
I mean,
Yes.
there's been a lot of ambassador trainings when we were smoking cigars. So that's the thing. So I'm like trying to think of like one. So I think that, okay, so at Glenfiddich, there are a lot of, we have the cottages that like workers can stay in, but also we normally stay when we come in. But there's a house, a croft that's across the road. And I'm pretty sure this might be what he's talking about, but I don't know if anything exciting though. We all just were like outside smoking cigars until like 6 a.m. Drinking a lot of whiskey.
Yeah.
And
and then you slept in a rip
Ian
house.
Miller. I'm sorry. Golly, now I'm like, what did he set me up for? Do I need to make up a story?
He's gonna get it for this one. I'm gonna roast him. I don't get many chances to roast Mark, and he's gonna get roasted now.
Well,
Thank
you
you.
know what?
Tracie.
So I will totally take the blame on this. Mark but definitely has a better memory than I do, and there's probably some amazing story that I'm supposed to tell, and I just don't remember. There were so many though. That's the thing. There's so many times we were smoking cigars. So there's this really beautiful house, it's the Darwin Hotel, and it looks like a castle. Literally, it's like you come up and you're like, this is like a mini castle in Scotland, like on the hills of Speyside. It's gorgeous. So we're all there, and what's really cool, so we still have, our coppersmith for like 57 years was Dennis McBain. And he's an incredible man. He's so generous, so kind, but he has hearing problems because he was a coppersmith. So he would like bang on the copper and hear where things were thin. And like, so he has his inners put in. And so we were actually at the Downs. We're all outside, sprawled around with all of our cigars, and he decided to just take them out, which is awesome. So he like couldn't hear a thing, and it was just like smoking cigars and hanging out with us, and couldn't hear a darn thing because we were probably talking nonsense by that time. And I appreciate him so much for realizing like when we all just get to a point where there's no need to listen anymore. And he's an incredible human being.
So we have a bunch of questions here from our guests in the room. Okay, so we'll take these, we'll do this one at a time. So let's start with the first one is, someone asked who's a guest, says, I'm a minority owner of a cigar lounge. What would be some great cigar pairings that you would recommend?
So what's wonderful for us is I don't smoke a ton of different cigars because Glenfiddich is actually partnered with another family-owned company. So Glenfiddich is 6th generation family-owned, independently run Scottish company. And we are actually partnered with Alec Bradley Cigars, which is out of Fort Lauderdale. They're on their 3rd generation, I think, family-owned now with Alec and Bradley. And so I smoke a lot of their cigars with the Glenfiddich, and each of those cigars is actually matched with one of our whiskeys.
Ooh.
So while I sometimes follow what they say, I actually also will smoke my own pairings. So I really enjoy from Alec Bradley. If I want something a little bit lighter, we go with the Coil, which I really, really enjoy. But the Prensado is one that's like my everyday. If I want something a little bit spicier, a little more chocolate, I go with the Black Market. They're fine and rare, which is just, it's expensive, but it is literally one of the most mind-blowing cigars I've ever had. It's just, as you smoke it, it completely transforms what it is, like how the smoke tastes, and just the kind of the impact on your palate. The texture of the smoke, like it just, I don't know, it's really an incredible cigar, right? I know, And so that's actually paired with like our 40, but I don't usually drink our 40, so I'll drink it with our 30.
Is there a website that has the pairings, or do you have anything you can post on your Facebook page?
Absolutely.
That would be awesome.
Share that. Absolutely.
As a resource, that would be great.
Yes.
So we can have everybody just check Tracie's Facebook page after this, and she will put that out there. So we also had another question from Erica. She says, Tracie, do you find that you draw on your musical theater background in your role as a brand ambassador, and has it helped you in any terms with being relatable?
I think even beyond the theater background, it's more of the military brat background. It's the fact that I was always having to make new friends, the fact that I never was stable, that I always was trying to fit into different groups because it was constantly changing. We were moving a lot. I think that's where I lean into that a lot, of just staying flexible, you know, like just being versatile and going with the crowd. And I lean into definitely the performance aspect when you're guiding a group. You know, when you're holding a room of 300 people giving a 10-minute talk about Glenfiddich Grand Cru, you are leaning into that experience of being able to stand on a stage and wrap everyone up in every single word. And that's what I'm grateful that I've had that experience and I've had that training.
I don't know if this is true for you, Tracie, but also just the fact that, were you a belter?
Yes.
So yeah, that healthy belt is so good for speaking in front of a crowd. I can do 4 or 5 sessions in a row and be fine. I don't know if it's the same for you.
Absolutely.
But that's one of the things that people don't think about, is just being able to speak. Yeah.
Just making sure it's off your vocal cords. Yeah. Absolutely.
My question's performance related too, so I'll jump in here if that's all right.
Yes.
I saw you do a piece on the Today Show. Which you should all find online if you can. Yep. You go through about 4 or 5 cocktails in about as many minutes.
Real fast.
And I have to say, you held that room incredibly, especially with some of the anchors having less than a perfect attention span. or not.
It was really funny.
And I just wanted to ask you how that came about and what that experience was like for you. And
well, I was very, very lucky that I had done a couple smaller stations prior to the Today Show, and they happened to reach out to our PR firm and said, hey, we're looking for somebody to present Christmas Eve. And basically our PR firm just sent them a bunch of videos of the different ambassadors and what they had done recently, and they happened to like mine. And I mean, are you kidding? She calls me. I was scheduled to, like, that day I was supposed to be on a flight to actually, I think we were going, where did we go, babe? New Orleans? I don't know. We were going somewhere. And she calls me, like, I was supposed to leave on, like, day before Christmas, or 23rd, day before Christmas Eve. And she's like, so, any chance that you're available on Christmas Eve to be on the Today Show? And I was like, what show? She's like, the Today Show. I was like, the Today Show in New York, like Today Show. She's like, yes. I was like, I will absolutely be available. I will make anything happen. And I basically texted the same thing to my husband. I was like, hey, hun, anyway, we could change our plan so I can be on the Today Show. And he's like, the Today Show? And what was interesting about it was there was some time before we actually started where I got to talk to Carson Daly. And most of you have probably grown up seeing him on MTV, and just, we know him. And seeing him older and in this sort of environment was so strange, but he was such a kind person. And we happened to start talking, I don't know how we got on this, but we started talking about our parents and how my father had passed, and his mother and father had passed not long after each other. And so before we started, he actually was like, tell your mother hello. And I was like, are you sure? Like, I don't know if I should do that. And he's like, no, like, do it. So at the beginning of it, I actually say hi to my mom, and that's because Carson Daly really pushed for it. And he's like, I understand how it feels to not have your parents around, and show her some love. And it just warmed my heart, and he will always be so close to me. He actually just had a baby, if you guys don't follow him, and is like a beautiful, wonderful dad. And I think that people surprise you.
Yeah.
And it was a really fun experience. I am hoping to go back. They enjoyed my performance and had asked if there were other things I could speak on. So hopefully once this is all over, I'll be able to get on there again.
Did you have, it just all happened so quickly. Did you have like an internal clock of how long you had for each cocktail?
Nope.
You just tried to keep going? Because they kept talking to you and I could see you move to the next cocktail knowing that you had to get to the segment. Anyway, I was very impressed.
Because I had done so that's the thing, because I had done a few previously, they also knew, you give me 3 minutes, I'll fill 3 minutes. You give me 4 minutes, I'll fill 4 minutes. So I knew, I can kind of sense where we're going to be. And I knew with that one, with 4, I was supposed to have like 4 minutes and I had 4 cocktails. So I knew go, like it had to go. There was no option, just go. And they had a lot of strange things to say, but they were all fun. And in the end, they all stayed after and chatted with me for a little bit to get to know me a little bit better and said that it went well, which just made me feel really good because honestly, it's kind of all a blur.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Right.
But it was an incredible experience.
Cool.
It was the first time I got car service, like full.
Ooh.
Yeah, and drove me out.
Hi.
Somebody at the airport with your name on a...
Yeah, no, like he was at my door. Like he was at the door, like, and then where do you need to go next? And I was like, well, the furthest place I need to go is the
New
airport.
Orleans.
I guess I should go there.
Exactly.
What's the road trip?
Take me to New Orleans.
Right?
I love it. I love it.
They would never ask me back.
So Tracie, can you taste or walk us through what we all have in our glass tonight? Well,
14?
I think I said, can you walk us through what we're all drinking in our glass tonight? I think a few of us are drinking the same thing, right?
Yeah, you've got a few 14s. There's a firing cane. There's a 15.
Yeah.
So 14 we talked about. So 14 years in ex-bourbon. So when we're talking, so this is also something I want to really discuss with people because when we're saying we're an ex-bourbon, what we're really saying is American oak. The bourbon actually, especially after 14 years, isn't the influential factor of that. What the bourbon did while it was sitting in the oak is what we want. We want what that alcohol did to break down some of the chemical components, some of the molecular structure of the oak. The way that it breaks it down is what we want. We don't necessarily need the bourbon, which is why we don't care where it comes from. We just want a high quality barrel. We want to ensure that oak is still really high quality. And the bourbon that's been in there, it's going to do the work that it needs for the oak because we're going to empty that out. There's not going to be enough bourbon left in those wet casks to really influence it after 14 years. But what it did to those casks previously is what really helps the Scotch whiskey. It takes out a lot of the overbearing oak flavor that we can't have. Like malt spirit is just softer than corn spirit. So we can't handle quite as much of that new American oak, especially with that char on it. It would just overpower the really gentle flavors of a malt spirit.
And are you retreating those barrels?
We will. So for this one, it's mostly, well, for those 14 years, it actually could be one that's retreated, but usually it's a first or second fill on the Glenfiddich. We will do a scrape and rechar because we actually have our own cooperage. So when every barrel comes in, they are all inspected by our own coopers in-house. If anything is wrong, we can replace different staves if we need to. We can rebuild barrels. We can actually take those barrels and take them from a barrel to a hogshead, which is just going to be a larger barrel. So it's going to be a little bit more of just a larger barrel for, economically, it's efficient. We can do, we can build a sherry boat. We can build whatever we need, but we are always we always want to make sure that we have somebody there to ensure that the quality of the barrels is high because you get 65 to 70% of your flavor and your color all your color is coming from those barrels. We can add color, but so mostly it's about the flavor. Barrels, incredibly impactful. I know I talk too much.
No, we love it.
Going.
That's why people are here.
There's so many like little things that I always want to throw in that I think we don't talk about enough. So for me, it's definitely about the fact that it's not about the bourbon. It's about what the bourbon does to the oak. It's hugely important for people to understand it's about the oak, not necessarily what particular bourbon.
Yeah.
So 14 years.
And this is great this is a great introductory scotch for bourbon drinkers.
Yes. Yes. So this was only in the United States. We just opened it up to Canada, so it is not an American exclusive anymore. But the reason this came about, 14 years in ex-bourbon cask, so American oak that was used. And then we're finishing it for up to 6 months in a new charred oak barrel. Kelvin Cooperage is in Kentucky. They do a lot of custom barrels. They're toasting for a minimum of 20 minutes. That toast is breaking up and creating all those beautiful wood sugars. Then charring to a 3.5, so it's going to create fissures. So when we do put the alcohol in there, it's able to reach in past that carbon layer and then also pull out some of those sugars that are in that barrel after the toasting. That is why you are getting a little bit more sweetness. Also why you'll get a little bit of that char influence on that whiskey. A lot of people are like, oh, it's smoky. Nope, that's not smoke. That is not peat. That is char. That is that beautiful carbon layer, just adding a tiny bit of influence there. But really, you're looking for caramels and toffees for me with this one, especially if you add a drop of water. That can often lead to that. Yeah, is that what you got? It is not intended to be a whiskey that tastes like a bourbon. It's just a whiskey that's influenced by American oak more prominently. It is created because we felt there was a need for sort of that stepping stone into Scotch whiskey for American palates, because Scotch whiskey tends to be a little bit drier than American whiskey. So that additional sweetness is coming from that oak influence, which is just that little bit step up, because you're still finishing with that really beautiful malt dryness on the back of your palate. That malt complexity will kind of finish on your palate, but on the very front is where you get something that is very reminiscent of a bourbon style whiskey.
Yes, it's delicious.
Phenomenal.
I like it a lot.
It's phenomenal.
And in an old fashioned, it holds up quite well. I always say just be careful of the dilution, because it is 43. So as it dilutes, it does get a little bit sweeter. So just being cautious of the syrup that you're adding, and then just the dilution.
Oh, that's a good tip. Good tip.
Is that enough? Do I need to walk through any more? Or?
I have a question for you about Fire and Cane. You don't have to walk me through it necessarily, but I thought it was fascinating that you also worked for Angel's Envy, which is also known for a rum-finished whiskey.
Yes.
If you could talk about how you feel like that rum cask interacts with the whiskey. This is similarly, I think, for a bourbon drinker who is ready for a little peat. There's a lot of sweetness in this whiskey from the rum, which I also find in Angel's Envy rye. And I've got a sweet tooth, so I don't mind. But I would love for you to talk a bit about that.
Yes. So Angel's Envy rye for me is I love rye, but I love rye for the spice, for the green, for the grass, for the herbal component. And Angel's Envy rye tends to lean a little bit more heavily into the sweet component. So for me, it was
like a dessert whiskey.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was pancake
A little
syrup.
too sweet for me too.
I didn't say it was too sweet. It just leans into the sweet component. That's
it just goes with the skin, is all I'm saying.
I love how graceful.
That's great.
So, with the fire, so what's wonderful about Glenfiddich is that we have the freedom to do a lot of experimentation. So we actually created the experimental series with Brian Kinsman so that he could play with flavor in whatever way he wanted, which really pushed the category at that time. So the IPA was the first release, which you have behind you, Ian. That was actually our first release of the experimental series. We actually worked with a local brewery in Speyside to create a beer that complements Glenfiddich. So it wasn't that we bought a beer off the shelf. It wasn't that we worked with them and used something. They literally created different beers based on the chemical structure, because they're both chemistry. They both have chemistry degrees. Based on the chemical structure of Glenfiddich and what the specific flavor profiles are and the actual molecules in there that they wanted to accentuate, they created an IPA using similar hops that create. It was really interesting.
Wow.
Did they sell that IPA also, or was it just?
They did actually, and it was like Scotch hop or something. They had a name, and they did sell that, but they couldn't put the Glenfiddich name on it. But it was in a similar dark bottle. It was definitely a nod to where it actually came from, to the provenance of it. But Fire and Cane is really cool because what we've been doing since I think it's 2003. Is 2004. We've been doing 1 week of a peated whiskey run. So Glenfiddich, we don't use peat. Peat is a broken down biomaterial. Basically, it's between a tree and coal. So as those trees break down, they break down and they turn into dirt, and then they basically will compact for thousands of years. If you dig that out of the ground and dry it, you have a brick of peat. When you burn that, you release a lot of really beautiful peat phenols. So those phenols, there's different types of phenols that have different types of flavors. So when people talk about peat, there's actually lots of flavors within peat. So it doesn't have to be just smoke. It could be smoke. It can be iodine. It can be like that sort of like a seafood, like a maritime sort of smoke. There's all different things within those phenols that you can detect. Yeah, so you can actually, so if you were to get peat from 10 feet away from each other, so to dig down 20 feet down, pull it out, take those, dry it, and then burn them separately, you can actually detect the differences. It will taste and smell, and then chemically, it will break down differently because you've basically just created there's different components that broke down different trees, different grass, different shells, different seaweed, whatever it is, has broken down in that little compact thing, which creates completely different balances of those phenols, which creates a very different flavor profile. It's really interesting. Anyways,
I don't know about you guys. I could listen to you talk about this all night, Tracie.
I'm a total nerd. You guys, you don't want that. I promise you.
Do we have any more questions? Do we have any time?
So, but I didn't tell them. So what's great?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, it's my fault. I talk too much. So we 1 week a year, we do a week of peated whiskey. Normally it was anthracite, super clean, burning coal. So 1 week, peated whiskey, highly peated, 45 to 55 peat parts per million. That's similar to what Lafroig and Lagavulin do. We take that whiskey, and it's been aging in our warehouses, and basically the family's like, what are you doing with the smoky whiskey? Like, what are you doing with it? So we had to use it, and we couldn't just put it out because Glenfiddich is not known for being heavily peated. So we're taking it, blending it with our unpeated whiskey, finishing it in rum casks. We're actually creating our own proprietary rum to season the cask, to then put the whiskey into.
So cool.
Yeah.
Wow. So cool. I love it. So cool.
But rum can add all different styles of flavors because, again, this is a finish. So when you're doing a finish, then it matters what was in it previously. If you're doing an aging, it doesn't matter. It's about the wood. If you're doing a finish, it's about the liquid because the liquid is literally just changing places with the whiskey, and it is imparting its complete flavor on that whiskey. Cool?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Wow. Love it.
So those rum casks, they're not being refinished. You're not scraping them and recharring those. You're using them as they're received.
Well, we're actually buying rum, blending it together to create our own proprietary rum, taking that rum and seasoning our own casks.
Gotcha.
So we're creating
very
rum
cool.
casks
so
to then use. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yay.
I have one more question for you. Tracie.
We got about 2 minutes left, y'all.
Okay.
Oh no!
What to you is quintessential Glenfiddich? What would you say is the bottle that represents the mission of the whiskey? Bourbon drinkers aside, Scotch drinkers aside, what do you think tastes like Glenfiddich?
Well, I mean, obviously it's 12. That is our Glenfiddich. That is distillery characteristics. Like that is. So, and this is our new bottling, if you guys didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. New bottle.
Ooh.
Okay.
I like the new bottles a lot.
She's pretty.
Very pretty.
Yeah, it is. It's sexy. So it also is a lot of ties to who we are. So Glenfiddich, Glen Valley, Fiddich Deer, which if you see it on the bottle, Valley, Deer. Glenfiddich, Valley of the Deer, Valley of the Deer. So the 12 is our quintessential signature reserve. It is our fruit, the vanilla, it is oak. It is a beautiful balance of our about 85% American oak and then 15% European oak. But what we also do that a lot of people don't realize, at our distillery, we do a process called marrying that's different than just stirring it up and like blending together. We actually have 2,000 liter marrying tons that everything from our distillery is going into. So after we blend together those 12-year-old whiskeys that have been aged all over our 47 different 47 different warehouses, when we blend that together, we then separate those into these 2,000 liter vats and let them sit there for 3 months. What that does is allows the whiskey to let go of a little bit of its sort of more volatile aromas and alcohols and really find a consistency within each batch to create a really beautiful whiskey. So that's an extra step that we're taking. And I think that that's really important for the 12. It is something that makes this whiskey a little bit different, but also makes it really beautiful, consistent, and it changes that palate a little bit and gives it a little bit of a richer mouthfeel. But yeah, I say 12 is definitely, it's our quintessential, this is what everybody starts with, it's the green bottle, it's the triangle.
Yeah.
The ingredients for Scotch whiskey, water, malt, yeast. Uh-huh. But my jam is the 15. And I think also flavor-wise, it is a very much a Speyside style. So I don't necessarily love to talk about the styles of whiskeys because we do so many different things. Obviously, Fire and Cane is peated. You know, we've got our really beautiful, rich, bold Glenfiddich 30, which is chocolate and cherries. But that one is just a nice balance of fruit and spice and a little bit of dryness.
Very nice.
And I can attest, it's delicious.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, Tracie, for joining us tonight. It's been fun.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I
course.
love
You're one of my favorite whiskey chicks.
Well, what makes me happy is that Uncle Nearest, like, again, a lot of whiskey distilleries have to create stories. They have to create that marketing around it, and to be able to speak with another company and other people who have something that they're built on, that is true, that is their family, is really, really exciting. So I just tip my hat to Fawn and to all of you for working with Uncle Nearest, and thank you for all that you do.
And Fawn wanted you to know that she says congratulations on your Icons of Whiskey Award, and that you were a ton of fun to watch, and it's the most enjoyed interview so far since we've been doing this.
Thank you.
That's high praise.
Only in the U.S. though. Mark probably beat me earlier today.
No way. No way.
Yeah, I'm definitely letting Mark know that.
I'm gonna text him like right now. What are you talking about?
Well, Tracie, you know what I think it is? I think that Mark's life is so boring compared to mine and yours and ours, that night that he's talking about was probably really exciting to him. And we wouldn't remember that, though.
I'm like, this is every day. What are you talking about? Whiskey trainings and cigars? That's every day.
I know, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and thank you for all that you're doing for whiskey women as well, Tracie.
It is a pleasure.
Cheers to you.
Again, representation matters. Bon jovi.
Yes, it does.